What up, Wizards? It's Deb from SBMTG. As always, if anybody else tells you they're from SBMTG, you're being lied to. But I figured today we would cover some of these Alchemy spoilers. Is that a boo or is that a yay? It's probably a boo from a lot of people, but at the very least, you got to know your enemy. And no matter how you feel about digital-only cards, and I've said a bunch of times that I'm pretty annoyed by them, even a guy like me can admit that it can be fun to look at new cards and see how they've used the digital-only space from a game design perspective. That's kind of interesting, and it's neat to talk about how some of these cards might work with other cards in Standard. It's a fun thought experiment, so let's participate in that for a minute, and then we can go down to the comment section, and we can all yell about how much we hate it. That's what comment sections are for. It's fun. Now let's start things off by looking at all the cards that have spell books attached to them. There are 4 of these that we've seen so far. One of them looks really good. Another one looks okay. Another one just kind of looks not great at all. And another one looks just hilarious. So let's look at the one that's kind of okay first. This is Ominous Traveler. It's 2 mana for a 1/1 human. And that 2 mana can be of any color, by the way, in case you're listening rather than watching. When Traveler enters the battlefield, draft a card from Ominous Traveler's spellbook. That card perpetually gains. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast this spell. And when you cast this spell, return a creature named Ominous Traveler you control to its owner's hand. But what is a spell book? How does that exactly work? Well, spell books are comprised usually of 10 or more cards, but when you draft a card from a spell book, the game will show you 3 random cards from the card's spell book, and you get to choose one of those. In the case of Traveler, you might get shown any of these cards: Dominating Vampire, Vampire Socialite, Stromkirk Blood Thief, Falconwrath Pitfighter, Wolfkin Outcast, Howpack Viper, Tovolar Dire Overlord, neat, Patrician Geist, Shipwreck Sifters, Steel-Clad Spirit, Heron Blessed Geist, Archghoul of Thraben, Champion of the Perished, Headless Rider, or Blade-Stitched Scab. So this is kind of an everything tribal creature, at least all the tribes that are important in Innistrad. But of course, it's going to be kind of hard to make work some of the time, because maybe you want tribal vampires, but it only shows you 2 spirits and a werewolf, or you're playing tribal werewolves and it shows you a zombie and a vampire and a spirit. So sometimes this can feel pretty bad, but I wouldn't discount the card too much, because it's still kind of a 2 mana 1/1 draw a card, which is kind of really good. It's also pretty good for tribal decks that need a 2-drop, and there are actually a couple of those, right? Sometimes it can be difficult to find the right 2-drop for your vampires deck, but I actually think this works a lot better in tribes that aren't trying to be so aggressive, like spirits, for instance, right? Not a very aggressive tribe, so you're not really wasting your 2-drop on a 2 mana 1/1 that doesn't attack very well, right? So I feel like the longer your tribe goes into the game, better this card probably gets. Now let's look at the one that's just kind of alright, and that's really depressing, because I really like Ishkanah as a character. Ishkanah Broodmother is 4 mana, 3 and a green for a 3/5 legendary reach. Other spiders you control get +1/+2. Awesome. You can also pay 1 and then a green-black hybrid. Exile 2 cards from your graveyard to draft a card from Ishkanah's spellbook. Now, first thing I'll say before I get to the spellbook is that the stats on this card actually okay. A 4 mana 3/5 reach, not the worst stats in the world. And when you have 2 mana instant speed, exile 2 cards from your graveyard to just draw a card effectively, this card could actually be very good. But then you look at the cards in its spell book, you get things like Twin Silk Spider. This is a 3 mana 1/2 reach that gives you another 1/2 reach when it ETBs. You get Drider from AFR, Brood Weaver from AFR, Glowstone Recluse from, of all things, you get to play a mutate card in sort of digital-only Standard, which is kind of interesting. Knotwall Recluse, which is just a 3 mana 4/2 reach. Hatchery Spider, really interesting one if you do happen to get this one. Mammoth Spider, Netcaster Spider, Sentinel Spider, which is kind of like the Sarah Angel of spiders. You got Snare Spinner here, Sporecap Spider, Spidery Grasp, Spider Spawning, neat, by the way, Spider Spawning, Prey Upon, and Arachnoform. I do think it's cool that you get Prey Upon, so you might be able to draft a removal spell for your green deck, your spiders deck, and that's cool. I really like spiders as a creature type. I love having a lord for them available in digital Standard. I really wish we had a 4 mana spider lord in just regular Standard. That would actually be pretty cool, right? Actually, I guess we have Blex And Blex is a 3-mana Spider Lord, isn't it? Does it not work with spiders? Am I crazy? Anyway, I know it works with pests and insects, so it's got to work with spiders, right? It doesn't have to. But still, I would love to have a card like this in Standard, just a Anthem effect for spiders, because spiders are one of my favorite creature types, and this would play really well into a Lolth. And I guess you can play this into a Lolth in Alchemy, if that's what you want to do. I hate that I don't want fun playlines in Alchemy that I can't play in actual Standard, but there's going to be a few of those, aren't there? That's the problem. But I am kind of excited about this card's very existence because I like spiders and I love Ishkanah. But I do wish some of the cards in its spellbook were just a little bit better. So let's take a look at what I think is actually the best of all of these, this entire cycle that we've seen so far, and that's Slayer's Bounty. This is just a single white mana for a legendary artifact that is a clue. That's kind of cool. When it ETBs, you look at the creature cards in target opponent's hand. It's already kind of good. Whenever you sacrifice Slayer's Bounty or another clue, draft a card from Slayer's Bounty's spellbook. You can pay 2 and sack it to draw a card like you can with any other clues. So this is really cool, by the way, because you get to draft whenever you sack a clue. So like the clue that you get from Fateful Absence or whatever that's called, the clue that you get from like Brybridge Tracker, for instance, you can sack those and draft cards from this thing's spellbook, which is really cool because this thing has pretty easily the best spellbook because it's just a bunch of removal spells. You can get a Bounty Agent, which is like a removal spell on a body, one of the only bodies this card produces, but there are a couple. And that's cool. But you also can get Outflank, which is a bad removal spell, Bound in Gold, which is a better removal spell, Bring to Trial, decent removal spell, Glass Casket, great removal spell, Reprobation, which is Collar the Culprit, which is okay, Compulsory Rest, Expel, not bad, Fairgrounds Warden, not bad, Iron Verdict, Luminous Bonds, kind of like a Bound in Gold, right? You can get a Raise the Alarm, so you just get 2 bodies. You can get a Seal Away, which is like a Glass Casket, or you can get a Summary Judgment, which is again basically a 2-mana instant speed removal spell. So I like this one a good bit, right? This is white card draw. It's a clue, right? It's white card draw that also draws you a second card. And that second card is pretty much always going to be, or at least you'll have the chance at getting a removal spell just about every time that you sacrifice this. So draw a card and get a removal spell guaranteed. And all this only costs you a grand total of 3 mana. Like, yeah, this card is actually pretty hot. Let's look at the funny one. The funny one in the spellbook cycle so far, at least, is Tireless Aglor. This is probably my favorite card in the cycle, so I saved it for last. I'm not sure how good it actually is, but this is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 1/4 human rogue. Whenever an island enters the battlefield under your control, draft a card from Tireless Aglor's spellbook. So this is a fisher person. They fish, and so there's a bunch of fish. That's what you're getting with this guy, is just like seafood, right? You can get a Fleet Swallower, which is interesting, Moat Piranhas, Mystic Skyfish, Nadir Kraken, Pouncing Shore Shark, and by the way, yes, you're seeing all the card images for its entire spellbook here. I don't know why the other ones aren't like that. This is much more convenient to just see an image of all the cards. You can get a Sea Dasher Octopus, a Spined Megalodon, a Stinging Lionfish, a Voracious Great Shark. That's neat, right? Just have that in your hand. Archipelagore, a Serpent of Yawning Depths. That's neat considering you're probably getting stuff that it can buff, right? Wormhole Serpent, which can go unblocked. Sigiled Starfish, which is a fan favorite. Riptide Turtle, and of course, Ruin Crab. So the goal with this guy is to just draw enough Ruin Crabs to win the game off of island drops. Whenever an island enters the battlefield under your control, mill 3 and also go get another Ruin Crab. So that's actually pretty funny. Right? I don't think we could all agree that's pretty funny, but I think that's pretty funny. I really like Tireless Aglor a good bit, if only for flavor alone. Also, I don't think the card is not powerful, honestly. I mean, you wait till turn 4 to play this, you play it for 3, and then you play an island and go grab a card off of it. Like, it's not terrible, but let's look at some more blue stuff while we're here, right? Let's look at Kindred Denial while we're looking at cards that are potentially very powerful. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for an instant. Counter target spell. Seek a card with the same mana value as that spell. What does seek mean, in case you weren't clued in on Jumpstart Horizons? You don't know anything about the digital-only mechanics. Seek is not tutor. It looks like it's shorthand for tutor, but it's not. With tutoring, you go and you just find whatever card meets the criteria, right? And you do that yourself. You get agency, but no, seek is random. It just pulls a card out of your deck that has the same mana value as the spell that you countered, and you get no say in what that spell is, right? But I do think this card is really good, right? Counter target spell, draw a card is great. Also, counter target spell, draw a card that is pretty much guaranteed to not be a land. That is also dope. So sometimes you're going to counter a spell with this, and then it's just going to give you another counter spell, right? You counter a 3-drop with this, and you get a solid coming at random, right? Or you counter a 4-drop with this, you get a Behold the Multiverse some of the time, right? Like, depending on what you counter, there might only be 1 or 2 of that mana value card in your deck. So, like, if you counter a 7-drop, guess what? You get an Auron's Epiphany. That seems like if you counter your opponent's Epiphany, you get your own Epiphany very likely, unless you randomly get a Hullbreaker Horror, which is also very good. So I think Kindred Denial is sweet. I think it's a very sweet Magic card, actually. But Obsessive Collector is next. This is 4 mana, 3 and a blue for a 4/3 spirit with flying and ward too. Whenever Obsessive Collector deals combat damage to a player, seek a card with mana value equal to the number of cards in your hand. So that's an interesting one. Kind of tough to plan around, which is true of a lot of the digital mechanics. A lot of them are quite random. Like seek is literally random, right? So you can't really plan around what you're going to end up getting here, but this is still effectively, whenever this deals combat damage, draw a card, right? And even if you have no cards in your hand, then you get a land, right? And that's not, at least you get something, right? But I'm not sure how good this actually is. I mean, 4 mana for a 4/3 flying ward 2. I do like the ward 2, but I still don't think this is the best stats in the world. So I'm not sure how good this is, but it is one of the beefier Ophidians that we've seen since 1998. So it could be better than I think, but I don't know. For 4 mana, we're doing some really disgusting stuff, like Kindred Denial in this format. So let's look at Geist of Regret. This is 5 mana, 4 and a blue for a 4/5 mythic spirit with flying. And when it ETBs, you put a random instant card from your library into your graveyard. Then put a random sorcery card from your library into your graveyard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your graveyard, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Really interesting card. 5 mana is too much, I would imagine, for this card to see a whole lot of play, but this is at least kind of draw 2 cards when it ETBs, and draw 2 is really good. You know, if you go get flashback spells, which is the obvious idea here, you go get flashback spells and just cast them out of your graveyard, and you get copies. So it's not only like you kind of go draw 2 cards that have flashback, but you also get to copy them when you do, because it's kind of like drawing 4 cards, right? Like, that's actually really, really sick. But, you know, up front, it's still 5 mana at instant speed. But the body's okay. The body blocks a Goldspan Dragon, blocks an Essica's Chariot, blocks a bunch of the, 4 power creatures in the format and survives. So it might actually end up being worth it. But let's check out Discover the Formula next. 6 mana, 4 and 2 blue for an instant. Seek 3 non-land cards. Then non-land cards in your hand perpetually gain. This spell costs 1 less to cast. Sick. 6 mana is a lot, but at least it's an instant. And they specifically, this is 6 mana, not only for draw 3 cards, but again, I have to point this out. This is 6 mana for 3 guaranteed to not be lands. And that's better than draw 3 cards. This is just better than draw 3 cards, like, period. And I mean, I guess, unless you need lands, but if you're at 6 mana, you probably don't need too many lands. Right, so 6 mana at instant speed for 3 guaranteed to be business cards. Not business cards, but cards that give people the business. And they cost less to cast, which is cool because you got 6 mana, right? When you untap, you should have enough to cast like 2 or even all 3 of the cards that you seeked, right? So I don't know. I think it's cool. I mean, it is random. Seek is, but again, this just basically reads draw 3 non-lands, which is not, honestly, even for 6 mana, that's not the worst refill in the world. It's really not. And it allows you to, kind of storm off in the next turn because all the cards in your hand, not even just the cards that you seeked for, but just the cards you already had in your hand, are less to cast. It's really interesting, too. Like, you pay 6 mana for this at the end of your opponent's turn, right? This is a play line we got to think about. You pay 6 mana for this at the end of your opponent's turn, and it might draw you an Auron's Epiphany. And that Auron's Epiphany will cost 1 less to cast. So even if you don't draw your 7th land, you'll still be able to cast the Epiphany this went and got for you. At random, yes, but still, something you got to think of. Or if you already had an Epiphany in your hand, this costs 6 mana to play, so you don't even have to draw the 7th land. If you have an Epiphany in your hand, it just makes that Epiphany cost 1 less. But, you know, maybe you foretold it. But in this format, if you foretell your Epiphany, then it still costs 7. But you don't get the birds if you don't foretell it. But anyway, let's move on to Clone Crafter here. This is 1 and a blue for a 1/2 human wizard. When it ETBs, conjure a duplicate of a random creature card from your opponent's library into your hand. It perpetually gains. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast this spell. So conjure is pretty self-explanatory, right? It's like the word create, right? And create works on the battlefield. Create a token, create this or that, create a treasure, right? But conjure is basically create, but it works in the zone of your hand. Couldn't have described that more nerdy and less succinctly. But still, again, conjure is fairly self-explanatory. So this is a 2 mana 1/2 draw card, and that's good, right? So not only is it a 2 mana 1/2 draw card, but it is a 2 mana, draw a creature on a body, and that's actually really, really slick, Even if you're playing against a deck that doesn't have a whole lot of creatures, it's guaranteed to have some really good creatures. Like, if you're playing against Izzet, you might get your opponent's Goldspan Dragon, or you might get your opponent's Hullbreaker Horror, which, pretty sick. On turn 2, the only creature in your deck is Hullbreaker? Oh, good. Well, I guess I'll have that in my hand now. I don't know. It's kind of nice. And even if it only gets you like a random vampire or something from your opponent's deck, then it's not bad. And like best case scenario, to get you all kinds of crazy stuff like an Elite Spellbinder or Skyclave Apparition, Brutal Cathar, Luminarch Aspirant, all of that's just mono white, but it might get you, an Old Growth Troll or something like that against mono green. Like all of that is good. Like all of those are really good picks. So I think this card is cool. Can't deny that I think this card is actually kind of cool. But let's look at Aglor. It's actually Igor, guys. This is just if Igor was a magic card, and basically what the flavor of this card is. But Aglor, Devoted Assistant, is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 1/1 homunculus. It's legendary. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top 2 cards of your library, and then put one of them into your graveyard. It's fun flavor. He digs, right? It's cute. Whenever a creature card is put into your graveyard from your library or hand, it perpetually gains. When this card leaves your graveyard, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So this would work pretty well with like Sanitarium Skeleton and stuff like that. And I think there's actually multiple creatures in Standard right now that aren't even arena-only cards that work pretty well with this, right? So I kind of hate that it's digital only. Perpetually is one of those things that I feel like we actually could track in paper. Depending. I mean, I guess there's some things like if the card gets shuffled back into your library, it's hard to tell which one has the perpetual. So there's some things keeping it difficult to track, but just so close to being able to actually do perpetually. We really are. But in any case, I think this card is great in a lot of ways. Like this allows you to sort of fix your draws, which is nice. I like that a lot. And anything with like Disturb, for instance, this works really well with. It works good with reanimation spells and stuff like that. It even works well with like things that remove stuff from your graveyard, like exile cards from your graveyard. Like if you attack with Graveyard Trespasser or something, you remove one of the marked creatures from your graveyard, then suddenly you just get a 2/2 and you drain your opponent because that's what it does. That's what the card does. So like, I don't know. This is actually kind of really neat in just a 2 mana package. Like 2 mana that's going to put a couple of 2/2s on the board. Like I'll take that most of the time. I think this card is neat. But let's look at a rare blue card. Another counterspell. There's two counterspells in this one set of cards so far. That's bananas. But this one is probably even better than the last one we looked at because it is a 3 mana card. Just a cancel, right? But it's probably one of the best cancels of all time. This is 3 mana. Absorb Energy is 1 and 2 blue for an instant. Counter target spell. Cards in your hand that share a card type with that spell perpetually gain. This spell costs 1 less to cast. That's so stupid. Like, if you counter an instant with this, then that's probably going to give you like what? 3 mana. It's going to pay for itself a lot of the time. And in your control deck, I mean, you're stacked and loaded with instants for the most part. So, if you counter the right kind of thing with this, it can, again, effectively pay for itself, which is absurd. Like, especially for a control deck, that kind of, cost reduction is just stupid. It's kind of very stupid. So, like, I think this is actually a really, really powerful counterspell. And in fact, like, one of the better cancels of all time. I think the card is that good. I mean, control decks want to double spell in this, on their opponent's turn most of the time. Or maybe they want the mana to do something on their turn. While still having mana to do something on the opponent's turn. Leave your shields up. And this allows you to do that too. There's a lot of cool stuff this card lets you do. Boy, there's a lot of stuff. You counter a sorcery, your epiphany gets cheaper. I'm just going to keep bringing that up. It's just, card's really good. This card is unbelievably, stupidly good. So, whew. That's one thing they can use this design space for, is to just make cards that are very, very good. Even if they had the ability to print that into standard, I'm not sure they should, right? So let's move on to some white cards here and look at Inquisitor Captain. This is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 3/3 human cleric with vigilance. And when it ETBs, if there are 20 or more creature cards with mana value 3 or less among cards in your graveyard, hand, and library, seek 2 creature cards with mana value 3 or less, put one of them on the battlefield, shuffle the other into your library. So this is really cool. It is a 4 mana 3/3 vigilance, not the best stats in the world, but it's always going to draw you 1 card if you built your deck correctly. I mean, this looks like really, hard to decipher text, I think, to some people, but barring anything that's like any creatures that have been exiled, for instance, that's the only zone that the card doesn't count. So barring any cards that have been exiled, all you really have to do is play 20 plus creature cards. At least 20 creature cards in your deck, and this will pretty much always go off when it ETBs and draw you a card. And sometimes that card's going to be, again, Brutal Cathar, Skyclave Apparition, Luminarch Aspirant. Mono white deck plays nothing but good cards. So this is always going to draw you like one really good creature, right? And you get 2 of them, and you get to pick the better one. So, like, I don't know. 4 mana might be a little bit too much, especially for the mono white deck that wants this. I mean, it's basically tailor-made for the mono-white aggro deck, but for 4 mana doesn't want this, or would rather have Legion Angel, or just nothing in the 4-drop slot most of the time, right? So, I don't know. I'm not keen on the cards. What was that? I'm not keen on the cards like Competitive Hopes or anything, but I will say 4 mana 3/3 Vigilance, draw a creature, really not bad in the deck that wants to play it, but is it good enough? I don't know. So let's look at Ethereal Escort next. 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/3 lifelink spirit. Not bad, right? Whenever Ethereal Escort enters the battlefield or attacks, choose a card in your hand. It perpetually gains lifelink. So note that it doesn't say a creature card in your hand, right? Just any old card in your hand. So you might have a burn spell or something, and that can gain lifelink. Like I'll give my Light Up the Night lifelink and just, hit you for 8. So that's a fun thing you can do, but I do think 3 mana, 3/3 lifelink is like okay stats, like decent rate for what you're getting, right? And even if your opponent kills it, like you still get value off of it, right? Like the biggest dude in your hand gets lifelink, which is how this is going to work most of the time. Is like, the 4-drop or the 5-drop that you still have in your hand gets lifelink. Now, I'm not sure if this is playable again, because this is a 3-drop for mono white, and that's where all the good cards in mono white are. But I could see maybe in if you're doing like best of 3, is there Alchemy best of 3? I think there is. If you're doing best of 3, this might be an interesting sideboard card for like mono white mirrors, perhaps. Like maybe it's not bad there, but I'm not sure it actually sees play in a mono white aggro deck that already has like so many unbelievable 3-drops. I'm pretty sure this isn't in the running, but I do think the card is really cool. I think the kind of value it generates is really interesting, and the stats really aren't bad. And lifelink is always, I was going to say lifelink is an underrated ability. Lifelink is underrated. I think this is true. Lifelink is underrated by competitive serious players and overrated by casual players. It's somewhere in between. Lifelink is just a good ability. Solid. But let's look at Suntail Squadron next. This card, guys. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for an instant. Conjure a card named Suntail Hawk into your hand. If you have fewer than 7 cards in hand, repeat this process. So Suntail Hawk is nothing special. It's just a 1 mana, 1/1 flyer. It's a bird. That's what the card does. You knew that. For some reason, Suntail Hawk is like a slightly iconic card. I don't know why, but it's just a 1 mana, 1/1 flyer. But if you have no cards in your hand when you cast this, you just go and get like 7 Suntail Hawks. It's pretty stupid. Like, that's really, really dumb. I mean, you know, maybe if you play this on 4, you won't have the mana to play any of the hawks that you just got, but you untap on the next turn, you just get to play a bunch of hawks. I don't know, it's kind of neat. Like, if your opponent sweeps you, you just play this. Go get 7 Suntail Hawks. And then if they sweep you again, like, well, you know, I only played 3 of them, so I guess I got 4 left. I don't know, I think this card is actually, it looks like a meme, right? But I don't quite think that it's for the birds. But maybe I just have a bird brain, and this card isn't actually very good. But I think a 4-mana card that draws you 7 1/1 flyers is not bad. Even when it only draws you like 4 1/1 flyers, I think it's still kind of good. I don't know, I like this card, but move on to Sigardian Evangel. This is 2 mana for a 3/1 human cleric. And when it ETBs, you conjure a card named Sigardian Evangel into your hand. Discard that card at the beginning of the next end step. When Sigardian Evangel enters the battlefield, 2 ETBs, tap target permanent you don't control. So that's a lot of ETBs on your 2 mana 3, right? Like, can block a, you know, werewolf pack leader and everything else. That's like 3 power. This can block in, well, 3 toughness, too. This can block and kill one of those. And look at all this ETB value. I mean, if you're trying to attack, it helps you do that through a line of defenses. It goes and gets a copy of itself, so it's not a very good turn 2 play. But on turn 2, it's at least going to be a 3/1, so I like the versatility, right? If I want to have a 2-mana 3/1 for attacking or blocking on turn 2, I can do that. It's not going to do much of anything else, right? I'll maybe tap down one of my opponent's lands, which is kind of good, you know, especially if I played this on turn 3 or turn 4, and I want to make another play, but I don't want my opponent to counter it. Just tap one of their lands down, or tap their blue source down, which is kind of cool, because this taps a permanent. It's not a non-land permanent, just a permanent, and honestly, like a Rashadan Port is pretty good a lot of the time. So just tapping down an opponent's land is better than you think, a lot, against especially control decks that tend to leave exactly as much mana as they need up, so... You know, don't discount how good that second ability can be, even in the early game sometimes. But I don't know. If you have 4 mana, you basically just get 2, and you end up tapping 2 things, which is cool. If you have 6 mana and you top deck this, you just go get 3, tap down some dudes, get in on attacks. Like, I don't know. This is a really, really slick card, and I really wish that this was available in paper, like more than a lot of these other cards. We're gonna go through a string of cards here that I wish were available in paper. And this is definitely one of them. And I know Conjure is a digital only mechanic, but I'm pretty sure that you could do this in paper, right? Just like have a stack of tokens that are Sigardian Evangels effectively, and then just whenever this conjures one into your hand, just put it into your hand. So like, I don't know, but they don't work like tokens, right? Like, you'll actually have a copy of Sigardian Evangel that can get put into your graveyard or put into your library, and you draw it again later, right? So like, it wouldn't even work the way I want it to with tokens. Well, I mean, you could put a token into your library if it's sleeved. That wouldn't make a difference. This could work in paper, and it makes me mad that we don't have it. But anyway, Captain Eberhardt is next. This is 1 and a white for a 1/1 human soldier. It's legendary, and it has double strike. A 2-mana 1/1 double strike. Been seeing a lot of fencing aces lately, but this is, I keep saying this, the best fencing ace of all time. Not only does this have double strike, but spells cast from among cards you drew this turn cost 1 less to cast. Spells cast from among cards your opponents drew this turn cost 1 more to cast. That is actually a really good tax. I'm not sure how often the first line of text is going to come up, right? If you're on turn 9 and you have 7 lands out in your mono white deck, I really don't think it really matters, but sometimes it is going to matter. Sometimes it is. Like, maybe you play this on turn 2 and you draw a 4-drop on turn 3 and it's awesome, right? Like, that's kind of cool, but I really like the tax on your opponent here a lot, especially with all the taxation that we already have in standard, right? Thalia, Redain, Elite Spellbinder, Paladin class, there's a million things. So this, yet another taxation card that's actually really very, very good. Especially when you get into top deck mode, there are going to be times where your opponent doesn't necessarily have the mana, all the mana they need to do some of the stuff they need to do in a given turn, right? You'd be surprised how much 1 mana can really matter. If your opponent does have 2 or 3 cards left in their hand and they draw a card that matters, that card costing 1 more might mean they can't double spell that turn. And that's really helpful. So, like, hurtful for them, helpful for you. So, I don't know. I think this card is actually really good. I like that it's legendary because you can't have, like, multiple taxation effects that make it impossible for your opponent to like top deck the card that wins and play it, right? So, you know, on top of like, let's say, you know, I have a Redain and an Elite Spellbinder out, you know, or really just a Redain out and a Thalia out, and I have this out. Well, if my opponent draws the Blood on the Snow, how freaking much mana does that cost them to cast? 10? Literally 10? So, you know, I think this card is actually extremely sweet. Like, this makes the mono white deck even better. I thought we were supposed to be controlling how good mono white was in this format. But anyway, let's look at a card you probably recognize the name of. This is Gitrog, Horror of Zaba. This is 4 mana. He's got a little leaner since the last time I saw him. 2, a green and a black for a 6/6 legendary frog horror with menace. At the beginning of each combat, if Horror of Zaba is untapped, any opponent may sacrifice a creature. If they do, tap Gitrog. Then seek a land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it perpetually gains green-black tap, sack this land, draw a card. So that's actually really sweet. I like that it just seeks a land, not a basic land, just seeks a land, you know. So you might get something really cool off of this, like, oh, I got a Faceless Haven off of this, or I got a Field of Ruin off of this because my opponent decided to, you know, sack a creature off of this. You know, not only does my opponent sack a creature, which affects the board state, but I get ramp. I don't know, it's just really cool. I mean, it might be a sweet land too, but you also get card draw off of this. I mean, a 4-mana 6/6 menace is already good enough stats, but if your opponent decides to exercise the downside, it's a huge upside. You know, again, you've affected the board state and ramped. Like, super sweet card for 4 mana here. Really, really cool card. A lot of people say that they don't like it as much as the old Gitrog, and I don't either, but I still think there's a lot to be respected about this card. It's a sweet dude here. But Begin Anew. Boy, Begin Anew is another ridiculous card. This is a 2 green and 2 white. 4 mana for sorcery. Destroy all creatures. Creature cards in your hand perpetually get +1/+1. Whoopsie. I'm not sure how many creatures you're going to actually have in your hand when you, you cast the spell, but, you know, it really does make deck building interesting. Because, you know, this is a 4-drop sweeper, so you probably want a few 5-drop creatures in your deck so that you can follow them up, or you can follow this spell up with those, and they get bigger. So I don't know, I think it's a cool card. A 4-mana Wrath is always good. It's very color intensive Wrath, and it's not every day you see a Selesnya Wrath. Right? But even with its difficulty to cast and its, you know, being in 2 colors that don't often see much play together, at the moment at least, I still think this card will probably see a good amount of play in just the right kind of deck, right? So I like the idea of having a deck that plays creatures but also plays a sweeper, so it has ways to like get creatures back from the graveyard, or just ways to draw more creatures after it wipes the board, or maybe indestructible creatures so it can wipe the board too. You know, I really think there's a lot of interesting deck building challenges when it comes to a card like this, but even if you don't play creatures, it's still a 4-mana Wrath, and that's just good. Let's look at Angel of Unity next. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/3 Angel Cleric with flying. Whenever it enters the battlefield or you cast a party spell, you choose a party creature card in your hand. It perpetually gets +1/+1. So if you got a rogue, a cleric, a wizard, or a warrior, and suddenly you get to just like play bigger creatures. And like, I don't know, it's pretty good, especially when it comes on a body with this kind of rate, right? 2 mana, 1/3, flying, lifelink. 2 relevant creature types, and one of them is party, so if you draw more of these, then suddenly, right, you can give them +1/+1, or when you cast them, then you give other things +1/+1 in your hand. So, I don't know, like the lifelink, right? So if you have one of these in play, right, and you play a party spell, you give an Angel of Unity in your hand, perpetual +1/+1, play that, then you have a 2/4 flying lifelink, which is really good stats. So I think this is a cool card. I'm not sure that it pushes party into real playability, but if you remember, in Standard 2022 for a while, it seems like forever ago now, but in Standard 2022, Bant Party was a real deck. It was like a serious deck. And I think it's possible that, you know, in Alchemy, this makes, you know, it goes a little bit of the way towards making party a real deck, because I really think that the stats for the rate on this are really, really good. So I don't know, I think it's cool. Relevant creature types, and just a good thing. Note, by the way, that you don't necessarily have to be playing like a party deck, right? You can just be playing a cleric deck. So whenever you play a cleric in your hand gets +1/+1. You play that cleric, another cleric in your hand gets +1/+1. So this slots into clerics decks like really, really well too, especially considering, again, the stats for the mana cost. Note too that there are some decks that kind of cross over clerics and angels. I've seen this deck on Arena many times. You know, they'll play like 2-drop clerics, and then they'll play like 4-drop and 5-drop angels. Kind of a cleric angel hybrid mid-range deck. And even though it's not the best deck in the world, it's a deck I see a lot of, and this is both relevant creature types for that deck, which I think is really interesting. But anyway, let's move on to Divine Purge. This is one of the better white cards that we saw, and we saw a lot of really good white cards. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 white for a sorcery. Exile all artifacts and creatures with mana value 3 or less. They perpetually gain. This spell costs 2 more to cast, and this permanent enters the battlefield tapped. For as long as each of them remain exiled, their owner may play them. So this is really cool, right? I mean, it's like a 3 mana wrath that only wraths things 3 or less. And it's not just creatures, it's artifacts too. So you're going to hit all of your opponent's treasure tokens and clue tokens and blood tokens and stuff like that. So I think that's cool. It hits those artifact tokens. Also, of course, this completely exiles creature tokens forever, which is important against like mono green and a bunch of other matchups. So just getting rid of all tokens for 3 mana is not bad. And the fact that, you know, you're exiling a bunch of 2 and 3 drops and making them cost 4 and 5 makes them way worse. Now, your opponent does get a chance to play them again. If the game drags too long, they will. That's not good, necessarily, but I do think the fact that you're making a bunch of things that would normally just cost 2 mana and are decent for the rate, you're turning things like, you know, Luminarch Aspirant into cards that are just really terrible for the rate your opponent ends up paying for them, and, like, they can never double spell, right? Like, they might be able to play their Luminarch Aspirant, again, that you killed, but they're not going to play, like, Luminarch Aspirant and Skyclave Apparition in the same turn, because that would take 9 mana. So they're probably not going to do that. So I don't know. This buys you a lot of time, but is it good enough? Is it really good enough as a wrath for decks that need a couple of extra turns to turn the corner? But by the time those other turns have happened, your opponent's just redeployed all of their threats, right? So is this good enough? I'm not actually sure, but I do think it's a really interesting 3 mana wrath that I think we'll try out. But just a couple of more cards left here. Let's take a look at Torov's Disciple. This card is hilarious. 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/3 human warrior with haste. So again, not the worst stats, or creature types for that matter. But whenever it attacks, and remember, ladies and gentlemen, the card has haste. Whenever it attacks, conjure 4 cards named Lightning Bolt into your library, and then shuffle. So Lightning Bolt is in Standard. I made a video forever ago about how it was coming to Standard, laid out the theories, and here it is. I am always right. Conjure 4. By the way, you'll attack with this, and the first time it attacks, you get the 4 lightning bolts in your deck, right? And then the next turn it attacks, you get 4 more lightning bolts in your deck. So you'll have 8. And then when it attacks again, you'll have 12. I wonder if there's any point at which you actually don't want to attack with this. Like, oh, I have to draw the sweeper next turn. So in order to not draw to draw the sweeper, maybe I should not put 4 lightning bolts in my library, right? I'm pretty sure it's like always going to be good to get more lightning bolts, and you just top deck bolts for the rest of the game and bolt your opponent in the face or whatever. Like, this seems really fun to me. And again, the stats are okay for the mana cost. Like, I might rather play Reckless Stormseeker in a lot of red decks than this, but I would rather play this than like the 3 mana red 3/3 haste legend from way back when at this point. That doesn't see a whole lot of play, right? But this guy is just a way better, way better. And he might even be better than Stormseeker. I mean, 4 lightning bolts, it doesn't put them in your hand or anything, but just 4 lightning bolts in your library is pretty sick. It's not, put 12 potential damage into your library isn't bad. And if you're playing with a deck that has the potential to draw a bunch of cards in a turn, like maybe you're playing like blue-red spells, right? So you have all these like cheap cards that draw cards. So you're more likely to draw into your bolts and stuff. Or maybe you'll draw multiple bolts in a turn. Like, you behold the multiverse. And you end up with 2 lightning bolts in your hand. 6 total damage. Like, I don't know. It just seems really, really cool. And I know we're supposed to hate digital-only cards, guys. And I, for the most part, I am not a fan of digital-only stuff. But this one is fun. This one and the Fisherman, those are fun cards. But let's look, finally, at the last card of the day. And this is one that I am the most mad. This is the one I am most angry is not available in paper. Right. Let's take a look at Forsaken Crossroads. This is a land. ETB's tapped. Sort of. As Forsaken Crossroads enters the battlefield, choose a color. When Crossroads enters the battlefield, scry 1. If you weren't the starting player, you may untap Forsaken Crossroads instead. You can pay 1 to add a mana of the color that you chose, way back at the beginning of the card. This could be in paper. Could totally just mark whoever, just note whoever went first. You know, I don't know why this can't be in paper. I really don't get it. Like, oh, people are dumb. Magic players are dumb. They'll just forget which player went first. And no, we won't. What are you talking about? Like, I've said before that there are a couple of systems in Magic the Gathering that are not ideal. I don't, honestly, as far as resource management goes, I actually don't like the land system where you flood sometimes and you get mana screwed other times. And yeah, you could say that's variance, and variance is good in a card game, but that's the bad kind of variance where I guess I lose for no reason this game. Literally nobody likes that. Don't tell me that you do. The other system in Magic that I hate is go first, draw first, because especially in standard Magic nowadays, the differential between going first and drawing first is an extremely wide chasm, right? Going first is this enormous advantage, right? So this card mitigates the damage done by drawing first. And I like that about it. I really like that about it. I want them to print more cards and actually print them, physical copies of them, that help to mitigate the go first, draw first divide, which is one of the most determining factors in a game of Magic, pretty much no matter how you slice it. At least in the standard environment, and especially in formats like Modern and Legacy, going first makes this just huge, almost incalculable difference. So I want cards like this for paper Magic, and I'm very mad this isn't available in paper. One thing I will say about this, by the way, in terms of the function, note that this is a May ability. Note that. So even if you were not the starting player, even if you drew first, you just don't have anything to do on turn 1, this is still a land that produces any color mana that you may want. And also scries 1 when it ETBs, which is just good. That's just good. It's pretty good. So I think this is actually one of the more powerful cards that we've seen from Alchemy, period. And again, extremely upset this isn't available in paper. Now, that's all the new stuff that we've seen for now from this set, but apparently there's going to be a little bit more. Wizards has said that there's going to be about 30 cards in each Alchemy release, which is close to what we've seen so far, but apparently this first Alchemy release is going to have around 60 cards in it, so we're only about halfway there. Now, when they finish it off next week, I may come back and do a video with the best Alchemy cards, and maybe I'll just finish out the Alchemy spoilers or whatever. Let me know if you're interested in that content or not down there in the comments section. But keep it light, keep it tight, keep it nice, and all that. But tomorrow we're going to be talking about all the different ways that you can build with Dollhouse of Horrors. That video has been in the chamber for the whole week, but then this Alchemy stuff happened. But I'm excited to do that video. I really like Dollhouse of Horrors, so sub to the channel if you haven't done it yet, or just check the channel in the next couple of days for the Dollhouse video, and we will be streaming on Tuesday night. I promise. I haven't streamed in a week, because this week was weird. This week was very, very weird. But I will be streaming on Tuesday night. Go over to twitch.tv/SBMTGDev. Check that out. You can check out the Patreon, $1 a month to vote on content, and I am worth $1. I'm worth $1 a month. Come on, it's $1. You can also follow me on Twitter if you want to. But I appreciate you staying until the end. If you're still here, it's just you and me. You're the only person that stayed this far into the video. How's that feel? I'm glad. So what an accomplishment. It's kind of amazing. But in any case, I really appreciate you for doing that. Brian, I'm just trying to guess your name. Mary? It could be. Who knows? But in any case, thanks, personally, for making it this far into the video. But let me edit this sucker and I'll get it out. Then we'll get on to regularly scheduled content, finally, after that. But anyway, love you guys for being here. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Wizard? There's only one of you left at this point. Spread love and be kind.